My name is Richard August, and I'll be your host. Our guest is Mike Stenhouse, CEO of the Rhode Island Center for Freedom and Prosperity, and a sometime host on this program. Welcome, Mike.
Great to be back in the studio, Richard.
In 2019, Governor Raimondo, during her administration, passed legislation that charged the Rhode Island Department of Education with developing and mandating social studies and history curricula for every public school district in the state. This was in response to a recommendation from a working group of community activists established by Governor Raimondo. Mike, doesn't the state constitution provide that the state is responsible for the education of our children, and they merely delegate some of that authority to local school committees?
Well, what does responsibility mean? Does it mean providing financial support? Does it mean defining the specific teachings in those schools? So responsibility is a broad spectrum. I think most people at the state level take that upon themselves as far as funding, make sure there's adequate funding for education. And I think that's acceptable. Not the way they do it, of course. We think the money should follow the student to whatever school they want to go to, public, private, parochial, home, whatever. But this issue is about whether or not the state should be dictating to local school communities a one-size-fits-all curricula in any topic. I think the argument is, Dick, and it's a fair point, that we can't have, Barrington teaching something that's radically substandard or different than what North Kingstown is teaching or Central Falls is teaching. We should have some kind of standard for what we teach our kids. But at the same time, no two communities are alike, right? We're a melting pot in this state. So while I understand the purpose of that law to create standards, I think limiting those to something like algebra and math, where it's very technical. But when you get into the subjective areas like history, English, and whatnot, that's where the state has been completely irresponsible with the authority the governor and the General Assembly granted it in 2019, and we'll talk more about it.
Your center co-published a report this year with the Civics Alliance and the National Association of Scholars titled "Taken for a Ride," which is a play on words of the name of the state education department. And your report is impressively subtitled, and I got to quote this: "How Rhode Island's incompetent social studies standards shortchange students by teaching radical activism instead of America's birthright of liberty." Now, the Director of Research, David Randall, at the Civics Alliance, has issued a social studies curriculum for K through 12. It is titled "American Birthright: The Civics Alliance's Model K through 12 Social Studies Standards." How does that differ from what Wright has put forward, the Randall?
Yep, I'll get to that one second. Let me just set it up this way. We're coming up in, 3 years on our nation's 250th anniversary, right? That should be a great celebration of freedom, because that's what the founding of this nation was about, the fight and the quest for freedom, and God-given constitutional rights, equality under the law. Instead, it's going to be a sad day for many. It's going to be, we've systematically depatriotized teachings in this country. We've created shame, and we've teaching that to our kids. So I'm really concerned about what our 250th anniversary is going to be like of our country. Here's the debate. I believe America's true birthright, which is the name of Randall's American Birthright, is that of liberty. That we were a quest to be free from the European monarchs, the caste system in Europe, the lack of opportunity there, and unaccountability of the rulers. Instead, we wanted to be a free people, an equal people, to pursue our happiness, our path to happiness as each of us saw fit. No guarantees as to outcome, but that's America's birthright. It's freedom. It is a fight for liberty. It was imperfect, right? We all know the ways we've been imperfect in that fight, from slavery to everything else, lack of women voting, whatever else. But the goal was noble, and that was our birthright. Instead, they want to teach that America's birthright is more about oppressors figuring out how to create a government so they could oppress the oppressed. And everything in the Rhode Island Department of Education social studies standards is looked through that lens. Who was oppressed? Who benefited? Who gained power? Who got screwed? Who got oppressed or suppressed? You know, and that's the difference between the two. Is it an imperfect quest for freedom, or was it a quest for tyranny? And I think it was the former.
Now, according to the group SourceWatch, and I'm going to quote, the National Association of Scholars, or NAS, is a nonprofit organization in the United States that opposes multiculturalism and affirmative action and seeks to counter what it considers a liberal bias in academia. The association's major donor is the Sarah Siafi Foundation. Now, this is a continuation of the quote, while the NAS continues to describe itself as an independent membership association of academics, in late 2009, it opened the membership to anyone. The foundation gives tens of millions of dollars annually to fund right-wing organizations such as the American Legislative Exchange Council, the American Enterprise Institute, and the Heritage Foundation, and anti-immigrant and Islamophobic organizations such as the Center for Immigration Studies and the David Horowitz Freedom Center. So, Mike, isn't the Taken for a Ride report a right-wing response to a proposal to impose left-wing social studies curriculum on K-12 public schools?
Look, I don't know a lot about the NAS donors or that particular woman about that. I can tell you none of this is right-wing, anti-Islamic, anti-whatever else they said in there. None of that is true. What this is a constitutional response. There were factually published, celebrated for hundreds of years reasons, the founding principles on which this country was founded. And now, basically with critical race theory and the 1619 Project, they want to turn all that on its head. You know, conservatives like me often get criticized for being, like that quote said, a right-wing person. We are where America has always been. We are where a founding principle. So conservative means hold the line, right? Don't go do anything crazy. We've always held the line on founding principles, on constitutional rights. It's the left who wants to pull us away from all that with modern interpretations and all that. So while it is a response to a left-wing interpretation of American history, I would not call it a right-wing or radical response. It is the response. It is the true American history. It is the true founding principles of our nation that everybody agreed to up until about 5 years ago. And now all of a sudden, just like with the trans agenda, we're supposed to disbelieve everything that we've known to be true for hundreds of years or millennial. I just don't buy it. It's a constitutional response.
So it'd be more appropriate to call conservatives constitutionalists?
I would. I mean, that would be fair. I mean, that's not all they are, but that's what that would be fair.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, the Alliance's curriculum guide says, and again, I'm going to quote, "We teach our children social studies, above all history and civics, so they can know what freedom is, where America's ideas of freedom come from in the long history of Western civilization, how our laws, Republican with a small r, institutions, and limitation of the scope of government preserve our freedom, and what they need to do to preserve their country's liberty," close quote. I've seen some recent polls and interviews on the street of 20-somethings, and a strong majority seem to favor socialism over capitalism. Is this what the Alliance is trying to overcome? Are we really drifting there?
Well, yeah. I mean, let me say to you. So I had a piece published in Real Clear Politics recently. You can go look it up. Actually, Real Clear Policy, which is a kind of a side to that. 16%. So think of this leading up to our 250th, which should be a grand patriotic celebration. 16% of Gen Z youth, only 16% are proud to be Americans. Only 36% of millennials. Compare that with 73% of baby boomers like me, maybe you a boomer, and 54% of Gen Xers.
I was born before World War II started.
All right. But anyway, so we have systematically taught our populace to be non-patriotic. Again, the question was...
Do you think that the Alliance,
Oh, yeah.
they're trying to overcome this trend?
Yeah, they clearly are. They want to teach the truth about American history. You can be patriotic and recognize mistakes like slavery and whatever else along the way, but you don't have to be unpatriotic, and you don't have to only look at the negatives in American history when we're teaching that to kids. There's a hell of a lot for our nation to be proud of. There's a hell of a lot for young kids, whether it's Generation Z or millennials, to be proud of when it comes to be their country. And there's a hell of a lot to be disappointed in. But I would maintain that dozens of times over, we have much more to be proud about as Americans than we are to be critical about. We got to acknowledge both. We got to teach both. But America's is a story of success, patriotism, and freedom.
Do you think that most students today understand that the Bill of Rights is not a list of the things the government permits us to do?
I don't think they understand much about it. Just like you said earlier, I don't think they understand why America was born because of the European oppression that happened under the monarchs over there, and why people came here to escape that, to be free. I don't think they understand our Constitution at all. I don't think they understand the Declaration of Independence, and I certainly don't think they understand the Bill of Rights. We had a civics law passed a couple of years ago in this state, but it basically teaches action civics, which means how to be a protester, how to protest against your government. They try to do it in academic terms. I'm translating, of course, and I might be overstating it, but I'm making a point. Action civics is not the same thing as civics. Mm-hmm. Civics is the true history of this country and the way our government is theoretically set up to operate. Yeah. Action civics teaches you how to be a protester.
Now, your report says the proposed RIDE standards, and that's how they're referred to as the standards, are, quote, bloated, vague, riddled with errors, distortions, and absences, and animated throughout by radical identity politics ideology, sometimes known as critical race theory, that permeates the standards with hostility to groups such as whites, men, and Christians, and above all, with hostility to America. That's pretty strong language.
Well, not everyone's going to read the 500 pages of the RIDE standards, but if you do read them, that's what it does say. If it doesn't say it directly, that's between the lines. Let me give you some examples of the mistakes. Now, we wrote, after our report and before Department of Education presented the final standards for approval, they made some corrections based on our report, but they didn't correct a lot of it. Let me tell you some of the things they did correct.
Did they give you credit for that?
No, of course not.
Okay.
They incorrectly, again, this is an academic body who got history factually wrong. They factually misstated that the Persian and Macedonian empires, they put them in the wrong millennium. All right, that was one. They said the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia happened before World War I. It happened afterwards as a result of World War I. They talk about a caliph in their zeal to be politically correct, caliphs being female as well. Caliphs are explicitly only males. They used the phrase 149 times, such and such American history, and who benefited from it? Of course, the oppressors. They asked that question 149 times in the original document. And who benefited from it? After our report, they reduced it to 31 times. So those are just some of the examples. Those are actually from the RIDE standards that they put forth. And I think it supports everything you read in our report's quote right there.
The report also says that the standards were produced by undemocratic means, drafted in an unreadable format, suffused in radical jargon, and teach a tattered caricature of history and civics, which will produce a generation of students who are taught not to be patriotic about their country, rather than self-reliant citizens who love it. You want to care to elaborate on that charge?
Well, it supports the underserved subtitle. This will underserve or shortchange. It will shortchange students. Now, it's also going to shortchange teachers, because teachers have to learn how to teach this stuff. They have to get trained Book manufacturers have to adjust their books to match this stuff. So it's shortchanging everybody, but the students, of course, in the end. The process is the part I want to talk about, the first part there. They pretended they went through a democratic process. They pretended that they had a comment period. It was for 12 days and nobody knew about it. They had on their website, nobody knew about it. They pretended to have these little meetings out in the public, all of which were staged with their own people to work to reach a predetermined outcome. This is what the left does. They have these meetings. They use something called the Delphi technique to get everybody in the meeting to eventually agree to the premise going in. This was not an open debate. There was no transparency in it. The people they did consult, that they listed, were all far left-wing radical activists. Nobody like us or anybody who would even think anywhere close to us was part of the process. It was a completely corrupt, one-sided, non-transparent process. And the results are what we got.
Sounds like the meetings and so forth were an echo chamber.
Exactly.
They weren't really looking for contrary opinions.
Exactly. They just want to be able to say we went out into the public.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now you're right, that quote again, neither the Rhode Island public nor policymakers had any chance to contribute to drafting the standards, any realistic opportunity to comment on them, or any power to halt the drafting and submission process, which you say renders the content virtually incomprehensible and bloated by unnecessary, repetitive, and unintelligible material, and it's blown to 453 pages? I mean, that's
well, a lot of those are tables with blank spaces, admittedly, but still, it's a
453 pages.
It's a bunch of gunk. Here's a quote I wrote in a piece. I think it might have come from the report. I'm not sure, but this is the best line. These standards, to take a little bit from Lincoln, these standards are neither by the people of Rhode Island nor of the people of Rhode Island, but nevertheless they will be imposed on the people of Rhode Island. And one more example, they talk about U.S. committing genocide. Tell me where, who? What?
They're probably going to point to
They just throw up,
out there.
That's the mumble jumbo, they just throw out stuff like that. We've committed genocide?
Yeah, well, they're probably going to argue that they're talking about the American Indian population and Native Americans, whatever the term du jour is.
Well, prove it then.
Yeah. I'm particularly concerned, Mike, about the report section that says, and again, I'm going to quote, the standards provides no writing expectations at all that would lead to a high school student being able to graduate who cannot write a paragraph on a social studies topic. I'm shocked today about the inability of most junior and senior high school students to write or read a complete coherent sentence. Are you surprised? This really has preceded these standards, has it not?
Yeah, I mean, again, standards are not the teaching. Standards are the goal. So it should be the goal, so flip that around. It should be the goal that every student should be able to write somewhat of a cogent narrative about why America was formed, what its founding principles would be, and whether or not they've been executed, where they've been executed well and where they haven't, and cite some historic. That would be a nice standard, but they don't have anything like that in there. Their only standards are to teach people how to protest, to ask those questions, and who benefited from it, and who was hurt by it, and who gained the upper hand. Power is a term they use. Who gained more power because of it? Those are the questions that they're teaching kids to ask. None of that will allow a student to write an accurate narrative of American history. It's an activist view of American history, and that's why students are going to be and teachers are going to be so shortchanged.
Now, the report claims, again quoting, the standards have subordinated social studies education to the desire to catechize students in radical identity politics ideology, and to give, as you said, vocational training and progressive activism, sometimes referred to as action civics, and a great deal of content that is politicized, incorrect, useless content that has been eliminated to make room for radical racial propaganda. Do you think the progressive wave is starting to crest at all, or are we just still going up?
I think it's cresting with public opinion as more people become aware. A lot of people don't want to believe, there's no pornography in our schools. There's no anti-American bias in our history. I think the populace is starting to realize what's going on. So in that regard, yes. I am not seeing a crest yet in terms of the institutionalization of this. I mean, while we're still seeing, like University of North Carolina, no more DEI stuff, diversity, equity, inclusion. They're going to take all that out. But still, more corporations, more academic institutions, more levels of government are implementing these identity politics, woke, critical race theory kind of standards. So you've got the institutions still increasing. I think the public, though, I think the public support for it is starting to go down. So I do think in the end, a lot of this will be reversed.
The standards history curriculum makes no mention of America's extraordinary widespread prosperity, the myriad of enterprises that fueled America's main streets, and the entrepreneurial and administrative flair that made America the arsenal of democracy in World War II. Why do you suppose the Department of Education chooses to ignore these aspects of our history?
That's the million-dollar question, right? But obviously they don't. In attacking America, you have to attack capitalism. You can't claim that capitalism is bad if and maybe by default socialism is good if you talk about the great prosperity, the greatest prosperity our people have achieved over any other peoples in the history of our world. So you have to just, if you can't explain it, you just ignore it and leave it out. 'Cause it doesn't, the prosperity of America does not fit the left's narrative, so they leave it out.
The report claims the standards are, and I'm going to quote again, a machine for ideological indoctrination rather than for social studies education, and condensed the community organization's handbook that radicals use to show them how to seize power, commonly known as Saul Alinsky's 1971 book, Rules for Radicals. That's a pretty provocative statement.
You know, David Randall is a true scholar, the guy that wrote our report. He's with the National Association of Scholars. And I had talked to him many times. And I always thought he was a little too forgiving. When he sent me the report, I couldn't believe this was the same guy. I've been talking, I'm like, David, this is like, he goes, the more I read it, the more I'm convinced that what I wrote is not a misrepresentation of what's in those standards. It sounds extreme to say those things, doesn't it?
Yes.
And I challenged him on that before we published the report. I said, David, this is really hard-hitting accusational stuff. He goes, well, it's true. It's what they're doing. There's no other way to interpret it. The tragedy of the whole thing, Rich, I don't know how much time we have left.
Keep going.
But the Board of Education, the Rhode Island, we generated hundreds of emails to the Board of Education pointing out all these kinds of things. 200 emails. I contacted each of them individually via email, told them that there's an uproar, referred them to our report, some of that language. The Rhode Island Department of Education presented their standards, modified after they made some of the corrections we pointed out in our report, presented it to the Board of Education, and those, what do I want to call them, blind mice followers of the Pied Piper, as soon as the presentation was done, within 5 seconds, a motion was made, seconded, and unanimously approved without any discussion. It was over in 5 seconds. This is the Rhode Island Board of Education. Zero intellectual curiosity. Zero willingness to even ask a question. They just couldn't wait to get it rubber stamped and out the door. And now it's imposed on every public school district and every public school student in the future on our state. It's really, really tragic.
Now,
we're encouraging local school districts to reject this.
do you think they have the authority to do that?
We're talking to lawyers. We're going to present that case in a cogent way soon. But the mandate that they must accept is not clear. We think local school districts, if they have the courage and if they have the wisdom, should not accept. This is crap. Excuse me, it is. And we do not think any school district should automatically feel compelled to accept it.
1948, British author George Orwell wrote the novel 1984, and he writes, quote, Who controls the past controls the future, and who controls the present controls the past. In other words, future generations will be controlled if history is altered or parts of it eradicated. Is this what we're seeing today, that the progressive left is changing history and heritage?
This is one example. Tearing down our statues is another example. You know, they talk about banning books, like we're the book banners. We don't want to ban anything. We just think there are certain perspectives that are accurate and certain that are not. You can have them out there, but keep everything in perspective. We think when it comes to like sexual content and porn, you know, there are certain age-appropriate things and certain things are not a problem. We have ratings on movies, PG-13, RX. Is that banning movies? No, there's certain things that are appropriate for certain ages. Again, the question, I lose my chain of thought. I get so into
I said, is the progressive left trying to change left history and heritage?
So it is 1984. It is that. Everything is there. Again, it doesn't. That we're a free people, that we strive for equality, that we've been a prosperous people, just doesn't fit the narrative if you're trying to rile up and divide people, right? You've got to make a case of oppressed versus oppressors, and I keep saying that because that's what it's about. So yes, they're trying to do that, and it's so sad to see so many institutions in our media, and I thank you for bringing us on, and you know, we do the best we can, but I'm so disappointed that so many people just follow this without any intellectual curiosity, without any pushback. The Board of Ed, how do you pass that knowing what it was without one word of discussion?
Yeah. I think what surprised me was to learn that in some school districts, when people try to read from the books that are available down in the lower grades, I'm not talking about high school, I'm talking about 2, 3, and 4 grades, and they have to excuse the children from the room. This is bizarre.
Well, and I'm glad you said that again, because that was the main point I wanted to make on the last question. Yes, it's bizarre. They're the ones banning books. Shakespeare, we had Ramona Bessinger, a Providence teacher, on. I don't know if you've had her on.
Yes, we have.
Over a year ago, she talked about how they took away Shakespeare, they took away Martin Luther King. So they're the ones who are banning the books, not us.
Now, we're getting a little tight on time, but I want to mention this. A little change, though. Republican Governor Glenn Youngkin in Virginia has ordered the public schools there to not teach critical race theory. And the Virginia Teachers Union immediately came out against his order. Yet in many school districts, even in this state, the administration and elected school committees denied that CRT is being taught, even when it's disguised in the cloak of diversity, equity, inclusion. Do you have an opinion on why the teachers union seems so intent on indoctrinating children that the white citizens are oppressors and everybody else a victim?
No, I don't, but it is true. It is true. The teachers' unions are a major force behind this. We put out a report a few years ago at our Center for Freedom and Prosperity. At both the National Education Association, American Federation of Teachers national conventions, there were proposals from the floor. Let's make a resolution that teaching students is our #1 priority. That was defeated in both places, and instead they put it, no, advancing a left-wing agenda is our #1 priority. Why? I don't know. I don't know why, but it's true.
We got about a minute left. Tell our audience what they can do as citizens, responsible citizens, and concerned parents. What can they do to address this issue?
Great, 2 things. rifreedom.org is our main website. Right at the top, you'll see, right near the top, you'll see a link to the report. Read the report, but go to rifreedom.org/action or Action Center. One of probably both. And there are online petitions you can sign that say, stop this. We do have a petition to remove the 2019 General Assembly and Governor granted authority to the Department of Education. They've been irresponsible with that authority to develop and mandate curricula down the line to every school district. They need to have that authority removed. There are 2 bills in the legislature this year to do that. They're probably not going to go anywhere, but who knows if we get great public support. So rifreedom.org/Action Center.
Mike, we want to thank you for coming on and discussing this very important and very critical issue that affects the future of this state and this nation. So thank you for coming on. And we want to thank the audience for watching this edition of State of the State.